Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and this is Cataegis, the White Wind Ziggurat Chapter, a 2D arcade action retro-style game which combines elements of Contra and Ninja Gaiden. Now, it is $9.99, comes out on the Steam store today. Before I begin this Let's Try, I want to make sure you guys know that this key was obtained from the developer. I talked to the developer, got a key in exchange for coverage of the game. That won't influence my opinions, but you guys should know the information in question. Now, Cataegis is going to be a very, very niche game. Why do I say that? Well, remember how I just said that it is a combination of Ninja Gaiden and Contra. You probably see one connection there. Difficulty. You see, Ziggurat Chapter, Cataegis specifically, is hard. Very, very hard. Harder than Diamond, in fact. And there's going to be people who are going to enjoy that about this game. Now, it definitely does play a little bit differently, and I do have some qualms with it about the difficulty where it could be a little bit easier, but for anybody who's looking for that old-style experience, I think it works. So I'm starting the Ziggurat Chapter at this point. You actually have to play through the arcade portion before you get to this portion, although I'll talk about how I actually ended up playing this portion even before beating the chapter a little bit later on. So we're in a dungeon. Basically, the idea here is that there's sort of an engaging storyline here. There is seemingly this competition. There's a coliseum at this point. You're basically... It's not exactly told exactly what is going on, and part of the reason why I'm really hesitant to talk about the storyline is that I haven't really gotten that far in the game. I've got 2.5 hours under my belt at this point, but on the flip side, yeah, I haven't gotten that far in the game. I did run into some bugs, which are fixed at this point, but it did really take a while to get into the game. Now, I'm waiting for the guys to come out here, now that I've shown them that I actually can use this sword. Now, when I say that it's like Ninja Gaiden and Contra, as you see there are enemies that come off screen, and they die usually in one hit, except for some of these bigger guys, and these, whatever you would want to call these things. As I'm taking damage here over and over again. Now, you'll notice on the top left-hand corner of the screen, there's a couple numbers there. The green bar is my health. I just lost all my health, hence I died. The lives is right under it, and then there's the charge bar. You can charge certain powers, and you have an A and B form of that power in question. So, for example, here, I'm using the power and hoping to get close here. Okay, use the A power. It's a slash at this point. You do get different swords and weapons in the game. You can buy them at this guy's store in the Ziggurat chapter of the game, but there is sort of an arcade-like version where you just find them as you run along in terms of drops, more like of a standard arcade version of the game. Now, there is, again, a storyline that comes into play here. I do want to talk a little bit about interfaces and controls, because this was a little bit strange. Like, okay, it didn't use any B buttons or cancel buttons like any of the other buttons that are actually bound at this point. It forced me to go to the exit button in particular. It was hard to sort of get around the interface. It's a little bit clunky. It's very clunky like the old NES days, and this game is a tribute to the old NES because it's very simple, very straightforward, and it relies on a lot of the mechanics that you expected from that old game. Knowing your enemies and your placement, like in Contra, is very, very important. Knowing where they're going on screen, dodging is a lot more important than necessarily getting damage out, and you will get further and further in the game when you sort of learn its mechanics. Now, even with that said, one of the problems I have with this game is controller support. Now, it does indicate on the Steam store page partial controller support. I never got it working. Unfortunately, I had real problems with that. And while the keyboard controls may work for some people, I really had problems in particular with dashing. To dash, it's double arrow, and at times it seemed like it wouldn't actually go, which is very important in a game that's so based on precision in terms of dodging, in terms of every element on screen. In particular, I feel like the design understood some of the elements that went into those old games, but didn't necessarily execute it very well. For example, you'll notice that, this guy's got a specific pattern, and if you get too close to him, he will fire fireballs at you. But in the same sense, you have to get close to him to actually hit him. Now, one of the major problems I have with the game is its sort of enemies dictating what they're gonna do. What do I mean by that? Well, in a lot of games like that, you notice that an enemy would have a specific pattern when they were to fire a specific missile, or, we're going to fire a specific, onslaught of things. And I'll touch on this a little bit later with the sort of floating enemy guys. But this game doesn't do a very good job of doing that. In fact, it just sort of comes out of nowhere, and you don't really have the time to react. Now, as you go along, and as you get a little bit more accustomed to the game, you'll start to learn, certain patterns. You start to learn, hey, this enemy's going to do this, and where enemies are coming off screen, and you'll definitely become better at it. This is almost like a game of memorization. Where's the enemy going to come? Okay, I know where he's going to come. Let me try to do something with him. In that sense, in the old NES style, it definitely works. And once you get sort of accustomed to that, you get better and better and better, and you almost can go through sections without taking damage. As you saw there, I was actually able to break that guy's spear just by hitting it at the right time. Again, a nice little touch to the old games of this genre. Now, I also have to say that in terms of game design, like the old games, sometimes you had to take mysterious leaps of faith that can really get your ass kicked. And especially with the low life bar here, that can be problematic. Now, the game's style, I think, is probably its greatest suit. The audio does its job, but it's more so the visuals. The visuals are relatively smooth. There will be a slowdown once in a while, but it does the job. And in particular, the cutscenes, when they play, they do a good job of presenting a story without necessarily telling words. I am more interested in the story if I can get past certain elements of this game, and I really do think the difficulty is going to really turn people off to it. Unfortunately, again, like I said, this is Ninja Gaiden meets Contra. Yeah, there's going to be a problem. You're probably wondering, wait, what's the Contra portion? Well, that has to do with the swords that I was talking about before. So, and the fact that you have limited lives. Similar to Ninja Gaiden, but I feel like Contra's sort of known for that. All right, let's see if I can do anything. Don't worry about that timer, too. I don't know what the timer does other than maybe like give me a point boost, which is used to purchase stuff in the store, but I haven't noticed, like, I've seen this hit 0 and, I'm fine. I don't have any problems. Color use is good. Everything sort of pops out from the background. I'm glad to see that, because I've seen a lot of games really fail at that nowadays in terms of, like, having stuff that blends into the background, unfortunately, not using color schemes wisely. All right, I do hit a checkpoint here. It's a sort of a secret checkpoint, but luckily I'm able to start right back from where I was beginning here, and I'm getting my butt kicked, as you see. I feel like okay, there's a good example. So as he moves open his mouth, he has a random chance of firing horizontally, vertically, or at the diagonally. But one of the things that would be nice to see about that in terms of design is seeing maybe it opens a little bit differently in the case of horizontal. Maybe it opens a little bit differently when it's, firing diagonally, so that the player can work off that and go after it. Patterns are one thing, but it can be very easy to lose yourself, especially in the chaos of screen of whether or not he's fired at this point. Let's take a look here. So he goes diagonally, and then I think he goes vertically. Well, we'll find out this guy. Nope, he doesn't actually. So, does he go vertically? Yep, he does go vertically. So there is no pattern, unfortunately. So I think the game could have improved on that. Now, in terms of controls, again, without the controller there, I felt like the game does do the job on the keyboard, with the exception of the dash. Firing is responsive in terms of your sword. Switching is responsive. Charging up your sword. I mean, everything is snappy and responsive. Very similar to the changes for Castlevania with the whip. Very, very down the road of the game. Not the original Castlevania. Now, this boss is basically dodge the guy at the top and hit the guy with the robe. Again, a very basic boss battle from the old days, but it does work. And in particular, boss battles do use patterns, and this one is definitely an easier one, but I do feel like it does do the job in terms of the confrontation. It's supposed to be punishing you for making mistakes, in particular here, and I feel like it does that job nicely. I will say that it is annoying with the achievements. That was added about a day before launch at this point, and unfortunately it happens anytime you hit the achievement, even if you have the achievement already. I want to see that fixed. I mean, it's great to have achievements and all, but like, for example, if you're cutting down a missile, you get an achievement for that. Having that happen every single time gets annoying, especially because there is seemingly a performance hit when that happens. Now, I've said a lot of bad things about the game. I've said a lot of things that I have problems with the game on, and you're probably thinking, okay, you're not going to recommend it. Well, that's the funny thing. See, this game has a niche, and in its niche, and in its sort of effort to extend itself to the old days of games, it does do that rather well in terms of getting that feeling of, I don't want to say hopelessness, but getting that feeling of chaos that happens in these kind of games. Like, okay, I'm going to get my butt kicked over and over and over again. I know that. Yes, Kevin Parsons is online. Yes, there's a cutscene. But I feel like it does that actually quite well. All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go to the arcade-style mode, Scene 1 Invasion. This is the first mode that you will play. You have to beat the invasion mode in order to unlock the Ziggurat mode. This is more arcadey style. It does still have the similar gameplay, but like the power-ups that I mentioned before are in these weapon drops. And you see here, like, I get a laser, which is a long-range weapon. As you see there, I do have two modes that I can do it. The first mode I was able to use is a long-range one. The second one is more so a vertical slice one. I got a spread shot here. This is where I say the Contra stuff comes in, so keep that in mind. Now, I think the arcade mode works a little bit better, mostly because I feel it's more, like, I don't want to say thought out, but it's a little bit more reminiscent of those old times. I feel like it does do better on this first level design at this point, and it's little things like this cutscene here that really brings it back. Now, I will say that I did face some significant bugs during my playtesting, points where it ended up, moving me forward in the sort of Ziggurat storyline portion, as well as some bugs with it launching. Those are all fixed at this point, but you got to watch out for them. I do once in a while run into an issue. It hopefully will be repaired over time. Now, like those old games, you will have bosses like this that you can completely cheese because you know what their patterns of firing is. So, for example, I'm just going to stay in this left corner because I know he can't hit me unless if he uses those bombs. And, of course, knowing that, I'm able to get through it. It's very much a memorization kind of game. Overall, I feel like Cataegis the White Wind is what it wants to be. And by that I mean it is a nostalgic look back on everything that the genre had to offer. The early days of the Ninja Gaiden Strider type experiences. Now, with those experiences comes the downfalls of those experiences as well. The fact that there's a lot of memorization, the difficulty, it's brutal, and unfortunately, there are elements that could have made it better in terms of the controller support would have been really, really nice, especially for a game like this. And I felt like at times the game was overly brutal. Like, there's this section here where you have to go back and forth between firing and dodging those missiles as well as cutting those missiles up. I felt like there's not a lot of room for failure in this game, but more so in the fact that even with some of the room and failure at this point, it can be very, very small windows, even smaller than I remember from the old days. But that is Cataegis the White Wind. I hope you got an idea what the game has to offer. Again, I can't necessarily recommend it for everybody. If you're looking for that nostalgic kick back to really, really difficult games, this game is probably for you. Otherwise, I would skip it. All right, this is Dragnix signing out. Hope you have a wonderful day and keep on gaming.